Hey team, welcome back. So in the last video, we started creating our domain package, and we also created our first object, which is the project object. So since in this section of the course, we're going to mainly focus on enabling CRUD operations for the project object, then we have to start creating, or we have to start working on this class so we can actually make it an entity, and so that we can give it the attributes that we need this class to have. So the first step that we have to take here is to annotate this class as with the @entity annotation. Okay, so this basically defines this as an entity object so that we can create a table with the attributes that we're going to define in the next few seconds. The second requirement that we need to comply with so that this becomes a valid object is that we have to provide it with an ID attribute. Okay, so I'm going to set an ID of type long, and this has to be annotated with ID and also with generated value. Again, this is very basic setup, a very basic setup, so something that hopefully you're already familiar with. Now we're gonna start defining some of the attributes, and I'm pretty sure if you in the last video you saw that I already had like a draft of this. I just wanted to have or to do some thinking in advance. So basically what we're gonna do is just set up some attributes and also set up some rules or validation for these attributes. Okay, the first attribute that we're gonna define is the project name, and it's of type string. Now, as we start writing our attributes also, I want you to start thinking of what would compose a valid project object. Okay, once we are done with the attributes, we're gonna of course take care of that, but I want you to start thinking of this. Okay, then the second attribute that we're gonna define is a project identifier. Now the project identifier is going to be at the core of our course, and you'll see this in action as we move forward. This is basically adding a custom identifier for a project object. Now you're gonna be wondering why I'm not doing this, just project ID, and there's a good reason for this, and one is going to be that when we start setting relationships between projects and other entities that we're going to be defining later, usually JPA is going to use an attribute of project underscore ID to actually set up those types of relationships. And when you actually have something like this, then it's going to be like an ambiguous attribute, and JPA is just going to give you all sorts of errors. And so I just want to avoid those by giving this attribute a very explicit name. Okay, so the next one is going to be a description for the project. Then the next two are going to be of type date, basically the start date of the project. And then the end date of the project. Last but not least, and just at this moment, these are the two attributes that we're gonna give to this object, is the created at and the updated at. And these are basically pre-persist and pre-update attributes. So every time we are creating a new object, or every time we are updating an existing object, we can keep track of the dates in which the objects were updated. Okay, updated at. Cool. Now, before we move forward, then I want to take care of the pre-persist and the pre-update operations for this project, which is where we're going to use the created at and the updated at attributes that we just created or declared here. So we're gonna be set this as a protected void on create. So every time we create a new object, then this assigns the created at of this object that we're creating a new date, or the current date. Okay, and we're gonna do the same thing with pre-update. Okay, so basically every time we create, as I mentioned, every time we create an object, a new object is going to store the date. Every time we update the object, it's going to store the date in which the object was updated. Next step in wiring up our object is to set up a constructor. In this case, I'm going to set up a constructor with no argument constructor here. And then last but not least, we're going to set our getters and setters for each of the attributes that we have just created. Okay, so with this in place, now what we could do is that we can start the server here, and then we can go and check our H2 database. Remember, we're going to start working or wiring things up on our H2 database, just so that we can do some quick development without having to set up MySQL. Now, in order to go to the H2 database, you can go to the localhost port 8080, as you can see here, and then H2-console, and that's going to take you to this view here. And again, if you set up all the dependencies that I recommended you to set up in the previous video, you should be able to see this. This is basically the main reason why we're going to use the DevTools one, because it actually allows you to come to this console view without having to set it up in the application.properties. So anyway, I'm not going to explain that. This is pretty easy if you just follow that recommendation. So now we're here in the H2 database, and as you can see here, we already have the project table. If you click on the project table, it immediately sets up the query for you to actually query that table. And as you can see, we have all the attributes that we defined, and obviously it's empty because we haven't created any projects. Okay, so I think we can just close out of this for now, and we have our first entity, and this is the entity that we're going to be working on to set up crowd operations for it. So the next thing that I want to do in this video is actually set up the repository. So we're going to create actually, let me backtrack real quick. Let's just first create a new package called repositories. And then in this package, we're going to set up an interface. Okay, make sure that it's an interface, not a class, and we're going to call it project repository. Okay, now this interface needs to have an add repository annotation. There are many tutorials where it's shown that this is no longer necessary. I still like to use the annotation here, and we're going to extend the CRUD repository. We're going to pass it a project object, and obviously the type of ID, which is long. All right, and as you know, the CRUD repository usually gives us a set of methods that we can use out of the box, such as saving our project, finding projects by ID, and deleting projects, and so forth. So we're going to use some of the out-of-the-box functionality, but we're also going to create our own using JPA. All right, so basically now that we have our domain and our repository, then our next step is going to be to keep on wiring our service, and also in the end keep on working on our controllers side of things, so that we can start persistent projects to the database via the API. Okay, so I'm going to stop the video here, And in the next video, we're going to keep wiring up our backend so that we can support CRUD operations for the project object. All right, see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.